Alright guys, welcome to RC Mojo. This week we're going to have a break from the big kits and make a start on the Comical Grasshopper. It's on a nice little chassis with some classic chunky Tamiya parts. Also, in a few places Tamiya provides simplified assemblies to take the pressure off the novice builder, but that might not always be for the best. Right, as with any build, the first thing we do is have a good look at the manual. Have a read through it before getting started, just to get a feel for things. Unlike some of the kits we've built recently, you really don't need many tools to get the chassis built. We just need a JIS screwdriver, or a Phillips will do in a pinch, some side cutters to cut the parts from the trees, and if you really want to push the boat out, some tweezers do come in handy too. The build starts with bag A and the rear suspension, which is fine. However, the gearbox comes pre-built. Great for the first time builder, as it can be a bit daunting if you've never built anything before, but Tamiya being Tamiya, it's built with plastic bushings. It'll work, but to get the best out of it, we're going to be replacing them with ball raced bearings. Not only will it make it run smoother and a little bit faster, they'll also reduce wear and tear. Swapping them out right away means we won't have to take the buggy apart again in the future. If we skip all the way to the end of the manual, we have the assembly guide for the gearbox. We don't need to follow all the steps, and since we're taking it apart, we are going to be going in reverse order, which means we're in a rather odd situation of starting the build at the last step in the manual. First then, we need to remove the two motor screws. They're long M3 screws that go right through the gearbox and thread into the motor. They unscrew and the motor can get removed. We don't need to remove the pinion, so that can stay put, but having said that, it is an aluminium one, so in the future we will be replacing it with brass or steel so it won't wear out. Next, going to the previous step, we need to remove the self-tappers that hold the gearbox together. There's 5 of them, and when you take them out, make sure you put them somewhere safe. Now we can gently split the gearbox, usually a bit of a wiggle while pulling will do the trick. What you want to avoid is using brute force and just pulling. It'll let go all at once and there's a fair chance you'll send gears flying in all directions. Just work it around a bit and the two halves will split. What we find inside is the usual Tamiya setup. They've been a little bit mean with the grease, so we'll add a bit more when we're reassembling. And of course we have all those plastic bushings. Going to the previous step in the manual, we have a nice diagram of where all the gears go. So we can pull the gears from the gearbox, putting them on some plastic, without worrying too much about where they all go back. Now it's just a case of removing all of the bushings. There's 1 in each of the gearbox halves and 2 per gear. Then we just go around and replace them all with bearings. When you buy the kit, almost all model shops have a bearing set as an option. For this kit it's around 10 to 15 quid and it really is worthwhile doing. With the plastic bushings, the shafts are constantly rubbing in the plastic. While the grease is fresh, they do okay, but after a few hours of running the wear will just start to show. Not only will the bushings become loose, but the metal shafts will wear too. By replacing them right away with the bearings, it means we've pretty much as good as eliminated the wear. As long as you don't soak them in water so they rust, they'll more or less last forever. Now we've swapped out the bearings and added some more grease, we can reassemble the gearbox. The two halves offer up and go together, but don't force them, just wiggle them about until all the shafts drop in. You need a little bit of pressure, then once it's all aligned, it'll easily come together. Next the self-tappers go back in. For best results, screw all of them in a few turns before fully tightening them. It'll let the two halves self-align so you're not building in any warps or twists. Next is the motor, where the only thing to watch out for is which holes you use. There's 2 pairs, one marked 18 and the other one 20. The kit comes with an 18 tooth pinion, so we need to use the ones marked 18. Nip up the 2 screws and that's the gearbox rebuilt. Okay, with that done, we can go back to the beginning of the manual and go to bag A, step 1. Right, first job, we need to open up bag A and sort out all the bits. This is a recent kit, so we only need to open the bags one at a time. Step 1 to 4 should only need bits from bag A. To make it easier to sort through them, we'll pour out the bags into some pudding pots. It looks like Tamiya, keeping it beginner friendly, are breaking up the build into lots of short sections. There's lots of extra chunky parts and there's not too much going on in each step. Next to each step in the manual there's a list of screws and the other fixings. The diagrams are actual size so you can check you have the right bits. For step 1 all we need is 4 3x10 self-tappers and 2 5mm ball connectors. For the plastic parts we need 2 N2s and 2 N3s to make up the suspension arms. There's quite a few plastic parts in the kit, but the part number makes them easy to find. The N is the parts tree we need, except this is a bit of an exception to the rule. You see, this parts tree is the L tree. Yeah, those arms up there look a lot like the ones we want. That subsection is indeed the N tree. Tamiya have left the two trees connected. A bit strange and could catch you out if you're not paying attention. Anyway, we need 2 N2s and 2 N3s, one of each from the 2 N trees. To cut them we use some sharp side cutters, so we cut them free as flush as we can. As long as you only use them on plastic, even a super cheap pair will last a very long time, literally just a couple or £3 from eBay. The arm parts have a right way round when we assemble them. At one end they have a mark by the end hole. As long as the marks are all at the same end, you're good to go. Slot an N2 and an N3 together and screw in the 2 self-tappers. Now the plastic is fairly soft, so watch out how tight you do them up. They only need to be bottomed out, not cranked up super tight. The next bit is to fit the ball end, which simply threads into the innermost hole of the 3. This is a machine thread going into plastic, so you need to be even more careful when you do it up. The best thing to do is keep checking, and as soon as you've taken up the gap, stop. Repeat with the other set of bits, and that's the rear arms ready to go. Step 2, upper links and fitting the arms. This time we need 2 3x14 step screws, 2 3x46 screw pins, the long ones, 2 5mm ball connectors, the arms that we just made, 2 N5 upper links, and the gearbox. Starting at the top, we'll install the 2 ball ends. They thread into the top holes at the end of the gearbox. This time the plastic is quite a lot harder than the arms were, so they're easier to feel when they're fully tight, but you still do need to take a bit of care. Next the upper links go on with the step screws. We're back to soft plastic, and the step screws are self-tappers, so be careful. Also, I've always found these step screws to have a particular dislike of Phillips head screwdrivers. You can usually get away with it, just keep firm pressure as you're doing them up. Although if you have a JIS driver that fits the screw properly, it's a non-issue of course. With the links on we can install the lower arms. These fit with the ball ends facing outwards, which makes sense as they're going to be on the same side as the upper ones on the gearbox. When we get to it, these are where the dampers mount. The long screw pins then pop in and thread into the arm. You might need to wiggle the parts a bit to get the pins to go through cleanly. There shouldn't be any need to force it, you just need to find the sweet spot and they'll drop straight in. Step 3, the wheelie bar and drive cups. Now I think Tamiya reckon you've got the hang of the basics by now. The assembly is a bit more involved, but it's still nicely broken up into small sub-steps. For the metal parts we need 4 3x18 self-tappers, 2 3x10 self-tappers, a 5x21 shaft, 4 3x8 metal spacers, the spline drive cup with a pin, the spline drive cup with a hole, and 2 black O-rings. For plastic we need F6, 7 and 8, the parts to make up the wheelie bar. Okay, we'll start with the wheelie bar itself, which is a super robust assembly, but also super simple to put together. We just need to pop the pin in the wheel, drop that into the end of one of the sides, offer up the other side and press it together. Then screw in the 2 3x10 self-tappers. An excellent, non-fussy design. It might not look all that elegant, but it's going to put up with quite a lot of abuse. Next we need to insert the O-rings into the drive cups. These are there to take up the slack so the drive shaft can't shake around causing damage. To get them in, we position the O-ring on the end of the cup, then use a drive shaft to press it down right to the bottom. If you look down inside, you should see the O-ring sitting nice and flat at the bottom. If it's on its side, fish it out and have another go. Fitting the cups is just a case of pressing them into the holes in the gearbox so they lock into the differential. In the manual, Tamiya has us thoroughly grease them up. That's because with the stock plastic bushings, you need the grease to keep everything running smoothly. We've got the proper bearings though, so we don't need the grease. In fact, having grease near the outside is really asking for problems, as it picks up the dirt and grit and it turns into a fairly effective grinding paste. We will, however, grease up the spline and pin, as those are all metal on metal parts where a bit of lubrication really won't hurt. That just leaves the wheelie bar, which screws into the end of the gearbox. Fairly simple, but it is made a bit tricky with the little metal spacers. The easiest method is to start with one of the screws and pop it through the wheelie bar plate and add a spacer on the inside. Then screw it into the gearbox just a couple of turns. Swing it round and prep another screw with a spacer. Swing it back and thread it in a couple of turns. Now on the bottom we've got enough movement in the bar that we can easily pop a screw and spacer in without much fuss. To make it even easier, a pair of tweezers or needle nose pliers to hold the spacer isn't really a bad idea. When all 4 screws are started, we can go around and tighten them all up so we've got a good solid wheelie bar. Very nice. Right, step 4, the uprights. Right, we need 2 3x14 step screws, 2 3x32 screw pins, 2 bearings from the upgrade kit, 2 stub axles, 2 black O-rings and the 2 drive shafts. For plastic, all we need are the 2 B4 uprights. Okay, first thing, we need to press the O-rings into the cups on the stub axles just like we did in the last step. Press them in, make sure they're flat and they're good to go. Now we slide a bearing over the shaft and press it into the inside of the upright. Make sure you're going in nice and straight and you get the bearing fully seated in the plastic. Same goes for the other one, so we've got a pair ready to fit. Next we start one of the pins in the outermost hole on the lower arm, offer up the upright and push the pin all the way through. Just like the other pins, we shouldn't need much force, you just need to find the sweet spot where the pin drops in. Now we need a drive shaft to go in between the cups. Lift the upright up so it's vertical and fit one of the step screws to link the upper link and the upright. Screw in the screw pin so it's just taking up the slack and that's one side complete. The suspension should be very free to move, but even if it's a little bit stiff, it's still going to do the job. It'll free up by the time you finish running through the first battery. It's also worth noting Tamiya want us to grease up the ends of the drive shaft, which if you're going to run indoors probably isn't a bad idea, but outside in the dirt it's just going to turn into grinding paste and eat the metal parts in no time. Leaving them dry will keep them going for just a little bit longer. With both sides done, that's step 4 finished, and that's also bag A complete. Any leftover parts can go into an extras pot to keep for spares. We'll be on to bag A next time, which has its own set of bits. Now I think that's a good time to call it for this week. Next time we're going to be setting up the steering and installing the front suspension. We might end up going for broke as well and running through bag C and putting together the dampers too. Anyway, that's going to be it for this week then. As always, thanks for watching, like if you liked, subscribe if you haven't, and leave a comment if there's something on your mind. Bye guys!